Hello and welcome to another episode of Creating Cultures that Outperform. I'm Frank Wander, founder of People Productive, and I'm here with my fabulous co-host and certified culture engineer, Terri Mays. So,
Oh,
the last few episodes, we've been talking about different research experiments and how you can actually learn from these and create a more productive culture in your workplace, focusing essentially on leadership. Today, we're going to talk about the false consensus effect. Now, the false consensus effect dates back to a research study from 1976 at Stanford University. And I'll actually pull up the real research paper here. You can find these out on the web, actually. So this is the actual research paper, The False Consensus Effect and Egocentric Bias in Social Perception and Attribution. So, what they found, quite simply, was that people tend to perceive a false consensus. They see their own behavioral choices and judgments as relatively common and appropriate to whatever circumstance they're in, while viewing alternative responses as uncommon, deviant, or even inappropriate. And so this study, interestingly, they took a group of college students. They ran actually 4 different experiments. One of them, they had groups of students. They asked them to identify whether they would walk around the university wearing a sign, "Eat at Joe's," even though they had never eaten at it. And here's an example of what happened. 53% of the people agreed to wear the sign. When they asked them, how many people do you think agreed to wear the sign? They said, at least 65% of the people would do that. 47% of the people said, no, I wouldn't do that. And they asked them to estimate what percent of the people would refuse. They said, 69%. So in both cases, they really overestimated how many people would do what they were going to do, so that more people were like them. And this whole notion of a false consensus effect and believing that other people are like you, that they have the same political beliefs, have got the same experiences. This stuff is not, is common. And this is the case. You see it in the workplace. So we're going to talk a little bit about the workplace. We'll talk a little bit about things to be aware of and what you can do to actually minimize the occurrence of this, especially if you're a leader in the workplace. So, Tara, initial thoughts?
yeah, this is a big deal because a lot of times I've seen this most happen as it relates to change management.
Mm-hmm.
So you find that people automatically assume that because they've been involved in this process, they've been analyzing the data, they know exactly what needs to change. And so the change agent feels like this is not a big change. And so we set out to do all of the due diligence with meeting with people and trying to get people on board. And the more people we have a conversation with, the more we start to see that this change, although it may be a small change from our perspective, is not a small change for everybody else. And so you really do have to be able to get outside of your own head and your own viewpoint to see that other people have different opinions and they may be bringing in different considerations or different factors that you haven't considered because you're maybe not involved in the everyday of that change, and it wouldn't impact you as much as it would impact somebody else. And so being able to get outside of yourself and your own viewpoint is a huge asset to you as a leader, as well as just a member of a team, to be able to see things from other people's perspectives. Because remember, you're already overestimating how many people you think like you.
Yeah, I think
For
that's
all
the
of
key
us.
takeaway,
Yeah,
right?
all of us overestimate it. So if you're able to take a step back and just begin to see things from somebody else's perspective, that's where empathy comes into play. So can
Mhm.
I see this as if I were experiencing it on the other side? And a lot of times, as a leader, you run into these situations where you have to deliver some news that may not be good news for a person to hear, but how can you deliver it in a way where if they were receiving it, they can receive it? At least they may not agree, but they can at least receive what you're saying. And so that's really, understanding. I've had this happen before to me
Yes.
during pay increase time. I've
Okay.
actually had a manager say to me, well, you should really be excited about this amount. This is this is a huge amount.
This is great.
This is great. And I'm like, is it great? Really? Is my opinion and perspective not valid? If I feel like I should have had more, or, if I feel like I've been adequately compensated, is my viewpoint not considered? And so that's really where this bias comes in, where people just don't consider the impact and the influence, the ideas of other people. They're just so focused in on, I know I know this is right, and I'm going to move forward. And it doesn't really matter what other people are thinking. You can't have that kind of a perspective.
Yeah, it's really dangerous, and as a leader, you've got to be aware that people have self-esteem. They really want to be right in many, many cases. So they automatically start assuming that everybody in the world's more like me. They think like me. They start to do what's called anchoring. They say, hey, my experiences are like this, and they tell me this. And I think the other people probably have very similar experiences. So it's likely that I'm right. And, you can sometimes see in meetings where somebody just really eagerly wants to promote their idea. And, as a leader, you want to just say, well, hold on, let's get some other perspectives here. Let's draw some other people into this conversation. Hey, so-and-so, what do you think? Person A thinks this is a great idea. What's your experience in this area? And kind of diffuse it before they go off and try to push this idea on everybody, which I've seen happen too, right? They're just much
Yes.
too eager about it. They want to be right, and they think they're in a good position because they're overly confident about it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or they've only surrounded themselves with people that think like them.
right on. Oh,
If you go
absolutely.
and you have a conversation with somebody that thinks like you think, then they're probably going to come to the same conclusion that you
Yeah.
came to. But what you want to do is find some people that historically don't agree with you. And as uncomfortable as that conversation can be sometimes, it's actually the best thing you can do, because it helps you see
Mhm.
things from a different perspective. We used to have these groups. I work in IT, and a large part of my role for a long time was relationship management. And so
Mhm.
we have these roundtable discussions with people that were outside of IT, and I would give them a blank check and say, tell me where we are hurting you.
Mm.
The more we talked about things, the more I started to see that we didn't even realize that this was a pain point for somebody outside of IT. We just thought, this is the most efficient way to do what we need to do. So we're trying to accomplish goals. We've got tasks that need to be done, and this seemed like an efficient way to do it. So let's move forward. But we didn't ask the receivers, how are
Yeah.
they receiving what we're doing? And so as a result, there were pain points. And what we started to do was focus on those areas where people were in pain and try to relieve that pain, so that now you can get people on board with the change, because now it's not just IT is doing something, but we are doing something together. This is a change that's going to benefit us and, make our lives easier, versus I don't want to change because I like what I have now and I don't want to change. That whole process of change can be difficult for people. A lot of times people just don't want to change. They don't want things to be different. Even if that change can benefit them, it's the pain of the change that
Yeah.
people avoid. And so
Mhm.
being able to recognize that and get people on board with you early on to really understand what they think and why they think the way that they think.
Yeah.
The perspective that they have is going to be different than the one you have. And you should realize that going into it, that people think differently. And it's dangerous to put a bunch of people around you that think the same way you do, because you'll more than likely be offensive. You'll be,
You're going to mess something up
somebody
too.
that, yeah, you're going to mess something up. You
You
really,
are. You're going to
really
make some
have to,
bad decisions because you
yeah,
got tunnel vision right away.
tunnel vision. You have to make sure that you've
Yep.
got a variety of perspectives so that you're able to have a more complete solution. It's really important these days, especially now with so much automation in IT.
Yeah. A
Uh,
lot.
so much automation with things like decision making tools where loans are being approved or denied based on technology, and no human person is involved in that process. You have to be very careful not to code your bias in the whole process of creating this new application. So it's huge impacts
Yeah.
into how we do our everyday life. So
And
being able to get past your bias and bring in different perspectives is huge.
it's really, really important. And that empathetic inquiry, really digging in, being appreciative of other people's perspectives, entering a conversation with that whole bias that I'm going to appreciate other people's perspectives. I'm not going to make the mistake of believing there's a false consensus and that I'm right. And I've got this egocentric bias about the world and how things work, because there are many dangers. And surrounding yourself with tons of people who think the way you do is always a danger. So if
Yeah.
you get a group of architects working in an IT division, they all have the same experiences and think the same way. Well, they're going to just all come up with the same thing and not challenge one another the way
Right.
they should be, right? Because they're going to be super confident they're right because of the amount of affirmation that they've gotten from the other people that they work with.
Yeah.
So let's talk about more things people should do about this.
Yeah.
You
I
know?
think, one other thing, you have to really be aware of that arrogance factor of, I know that I'm right and everybody else who thinks differently than me, they're wrong. Like,
Yeah.
you really do have to get past that and be able to open yourself up to having criticism and receiving it well, seeing it not as a critique of you, but of what you're working on,
Yeah.
making sure that, you're being professional in the process.
Mhm.
But there are times when you may have totally missed something, and it's okay because you've got a team. That's the whole reason we have a team, is so you can have multiple perspectives and different ideas. So you don't want to squash people's ideas or thoughts. You want them to feel like they can be open and honest about how they really feel.
Oh, yeah, and as long as you educate your people in the organization on the fact that this is science, that there is this false consensus bias, then you're in a good position to say, look, let's avoid this. They understand it. Let's be open to other people's opinions. And let's really do that kind of appreciative inquiry into what other people think and believe. And having that just as a known fact, I think opens people's um, ability to actually accept other opinions and stuff. It's more openness and transparency around what's going on in general. And I think that's really, really valuable.
Yes, I do. And I think if you'll add this comic in there, I think this is like perfect timing for it,
Yeah,
because it really speaks to how we get so caught up in our own world sometimes, and we just assume that everybody thinks like we think.
yeah.
But I love this. It's like, no matter how correct you are, there will always be someone who disagrees with you. And that is absolutely true. But I love the response. That's not true. I've never disagreed with
Oh,
anyone. And
yeah.
it's like, in the process of you telling me that you never disagree, you are disagreeing with me. Like,
Yeah,
this comic kind of sums it all up, that people just assume that everybody is like them, that they think like them, that they're going to have the
yep,
same kind of a response. But we're all looking at life through our perspective, through our own lens of life experience. And so we have to take that into consideration, because a lot of times people have had a different experience. And so that has caused them to see things negatively or positively. And
yeah,
so you have to keep that in mind, that people have this different life experience, different backgrounds, different upbringings, different things that they've experienced on the job, different types of people that they've worked with. And sometimes situations will trigger negative responses from people, and it's not about the actual situation. It's about something that happened to them in the past, or somebody else that you remind them of.
hmm,
So it really has nothing to do with the current situation. And you have to be aware of that when you're dealing with people, to not let your emotions lead. You have to let your logic lead and let the
yeah.
emotions follow.
Emotion is real dangerous. It's logic that you've got to use. And that's why being willing to just even distance yourself from your own opinion and let people know that, hey, this is an option, but I've considered these other alternatives, and here's other possibilities. That distance opens the door to other people feeling comfortable bringing stuff up right away, because they know you're not really locked on, especially if you're the person in charge. You don't want to be the first one to come up with the idea. You want to let everybody come up with their ideas, because people are automatically going to want to not go against what you're thinking. So you got
Right.
to be very careful of your power. But be aware of this. The false consensus effect is real. This is science. People automatically think that the world thinks like they do, and they're very willing to promote an opinion. They hang out with people who think the way they do. And I think the change management one really resonated with me, Terry, when you mentioned it, because I've seen that myself. People automatically assume, well, hey, this doesn't look too bad. Come on, let's
Yeah,
just roll this out and deploy it to everybody. And no, that's wrong. Not the
right.
case.
And that's why you've got to include different perspectives. That's essentially the bottom line of it all. You know,
See,
you're looking through the lens of your department or your role, and so you can only see so much. But once you expand that conversation to include, other people that are on different teams in different roles and understand what they do and how your change impacts them, it makes such a big difference when you can do that up
huge.
front.
It's huge. Well, so be aware of this. When you're in the workplace, make sure that people around you realize they're more likely to believe people agree with them uh, than the actual numbers would support. So this is a real thing. It is science. I've seen it in action many times. We gave you some good examples here today.
Mm.
Just make sure people in the organization are aware this is real. Make sure they do this appreciative inquiry, get other people's opinions on the table, and really move away from this kind of egocentric bias that many, many people have, spending so much time protecting their self-esteem, right?
Yes.
So listen, we're here every Wednesday at 3 o'clock Eastern time. We're going to find another interesting piece of research to share next week. We'll go over it. We'll tell you what the impact on the workplace is, things you should be aware of, how to create a culture that outperforms without burning people out. It's a great thing. So we'll see you next week, 3 o'clock Eastern on Wednesday.
Yes. Bye for now.